All right, guys. So that is you guys, need to get through a few things today with um, learning. Okay. So thus far, we started talking a little bit about learning and kind of what it entails and what it actually is. But we just kind of barely started it. Okay. So we got into a little bit of, hold on a second, Pavlov and Pavlov's dogs, and we started to look at conditioning, but we really haven't got much further than that yet. So I showed you guys obviously a few videos as far as like what Pavlov's dogs are and what they did and how we train them and so on and so forth. Okay, we talked about associative learning, observational learning, like how kids will follow around their parents and do exactly what they do, which is not surprising. Actually, about 3 minutes ago, my son walked in here. I went over and turned something on, and then he went over and pretended to do the exact same thing. So it's constantly happening. It's reproducing things, okay? Associative learning is you're just making connections. We've already talked about that. We got to this particular point in classical conditioning. We briefly talked about operant conditioning. Okay, once again, like you have these notes, by the way. They are, I believe, on November 16th. If you look at your Google Classroom, they're already there. So we got to this. We talked briefly about the unconditioned stimulus, which is something that causes an unconditioned response. It produces a response without learning. It's just something that naturally occurs, naturally happens. Unconditioned response is that unlearned reaction to it. So the dog drooling in some cases. Okay. Talked a little bit about conditioned stimulus, and that's like it was neutral, tuning fork, and then when you pair it with something, it eventually becomes the conditioned stimulus. Okay. And then a conditioned response is when you pair that conditioned stimulus with that unconditioned stimulus. Okay. Eventually, it's going to give you that response once you take away the unconditioned stimulus. So we've been there, we've done that. Talked about this a little bit in class and how there's studies have been done with food and all kinds of random stuff to, well, basically determine romantic arousal, which is kind of odd. We will get to this here on the bottom. Okay, it's a study that's done. It's called the Garcia effect. We're going to talk about that a little bit later, not necessarily today, but we'll get there. We talked about this the last day you guys were in class. Okay, this is J.B. Watson in Classical Conditioning in Humans. We talked about little Albert, that poor little guy, how he had some issues after this. They altered his behavior. They changed it. We basically discussed how with classical conditioning, it's something that's naturally occurring, and a lot of things can trigger you guys to have fears of certain things, phobias, how you react to certain things. So we went through some of that stuff once again on Monday and Tuesday. So we haven't got this far yet, and basically this is kind of what conditioning is being used for. Okay, whether it be breaking habits, which is called counter conditioning. So it's like changing a relationship between something. Or aversive conditioning is also used to stop you guys from doing certain things. So like nail biting, for example. What people will do that you constantly have, like a lot of people will do it when they're nervous. Okay, so you get really nervous and you start chewing on your nails. What people will do is they will, in order to change that habit, because it's a bad habit, is they'll put vinegar on their nails. Okay, so you go and you start chewing on your nails, it tastes like vinegar. Well, that's disgusting. So eventually what that's going to cause is your behavior to change. You're not going to do it anymore. That's what counter conditioning is. Okay, so these are some things that people have done to stop nail biting. They've done it with aversive conditioning as well. So like if you are a person that struggles with substances, in particular with alcohol, there's something that you can take that basically when you drink, you're going to vomit all over the place. It makes you vomit all over the place. And it gives you some kind of aversion to drinking. So every time you smell booze or think of it, you're going to want to throw up. Okay, you're altering that behavior. Okay, so those are some things that are used to kind of break habits and teach you guys how to do that. As we go forward, okay, there's another thing called habituation, which just basically means like it's another fancy word for tolerance. Okay, habituation just means that you can have learned behaviors, but at some point in time, you're going to have to up that learned behavior to get the same effect. So like, for example, if you are, you're battling addiction issues, okay, like you can see here, you're going to have to, like, so if you have an alcohol problem, you're going to have to start drinking more because you start to develop a tolerance to it. Okay, that's what habituation is. Drugs are the same way. Like, people that have addiction to drugs will have to start taking more and more and more of them, just to feel that same high. Okay, so behaviorism, okay, this is part of that repeated behavior over and over and over and over and over, and the body will eventually crave it and tell you need it. That's been classically conditioned, which, by the way, these are not vitamins, so don't take them. So as we move forward, we're going to start to look at operant conditioning. No, we're not going to get through all of this today, simply because I am not going to take a video of myself talking and going through a PowerPoint for more than 10 minutes. So it'll be a little bit quicker, actually. So operant conditioning is also conditioning. Classical conditioning is one of those things, remember, that is naturally occurring. Operant conditioning is not naturally occurring. Basically, with operant conditioning is you're giving some type of reinforcer to change that particular behavior, and it's something that's not generally natural. It's a learned behavior. It's something that you can learn and you can control. It's voluntary. So these are what are called Skinner boxes. You're going to watch a little something later about a Skinner box, or pigeons. They're going to play table tennis, which they can be taught how to do, okay, through operant conditioning. Okay, so we'll get to Skinner boxes a little bit later as well. Long story short, this is probably the one that you guys have seen the most. And what it is there's a little electric grid here. There's a little shock generator. There's two little lights. At first, what happens is they just put a mouse in this little guy just to see what happens. The mouse starts walking all over the place, and eventually it hits this lever. Well, once it even touches the lever, a food pellet drops down. It reinforces that behavior. Eventually, the rodent here, the mouse, realizes, like, every time it pushes this lever, food's going to drop, so it starts hitting it all the time. Well, after a while, they take that away and they use these lights. Okay, and every time the light turns green, okay, the mouse has no idea what the heck to do. Okay, so it just kind of continues to move around, whatever, and eventually it hits the lever and food drops. Well, every time the green turns green from that time on, the mouse with the lever, food will drop, thus creating operant condition. You're basically teaching this mouse every time how it sees, or when it sees a light, to hit this lever and food to come out. Okay, and then later on down the road, it'll go red, or it'll turn green. It'll hit the lever, nothing will happen, and then it'll turn red. And right before, and if it's red for a certain period of time, it'll get a shock. Eventually, the mouse realizes that once it hits red, it's got a few seconds to hit the lever, and then it hits the lever, food comes. So that's what operant conditioning is. The Skinner box works out really, really well. And operant conditioning is used all the time. Okay, you use it every day of your life basically to manipulate. Like, some teachers, after you raise your hand and get an answer right, they'll chuck food at you or candy at you. It works. There's a reason that I bring food into your class all the time, because, well, it's going to show you guys that there are some kind of reinforcement. There's some kind of reward if you do a desired or act a desired way. And that's what operant conditioning shows us. Okay. So once again, the name to associate with this is B.F. Skinner. He's responsible for operant conditioning, whereas J.B. Watson is classical with humans. Pavlov is classical with animals. So these are kind of the differences between classical and operant. Okay, so if you ever have a question on this, go back and look at this. It will actually help you. Okay. The reason that this work is, well, it's called the law of effect, and that was created by Edward Thorndike. And basically, he realized that if there are consequences in place, you're more likely to do or get a desired response. Okay. So consequences have power. They influence the likelihood that something is going to be repeated. So, like, every day when Cars pulls out her phone in class, if I take that away every single day, eventually she'll stop. Okay? If there's an unpleasant outcome, it decreases your dependency. It decreases your ability to do that. So the law of effect just basically says, like, there are going to be consequences. And consequences have huge powers. That's why your parents, for example, will threaten to ground you or threaten to spank you when you do something wrong. Okay? There are consequences, and they will, in fact, create some kind of behavior. Okay, so Thorndike creates the law of effect, and that's kind of what the law of effect is. So that is all we're going to get to today, because I don't want to crush you guys. I don't want to get too much into depth yet. We're going to start to go over shaping next week. We're going to get to positive and negative reinforcement, which I think are confusing. We'll get to positive and negative punishment, learn helplessness. So we've got a ways to go, but I just kind of wanted to walk you through some basic stuff first. So enjoy your bunkers. Hopefully everything's going smoothly. Hopefully nothing's terrible. See you guys on Friday, then Tuesday.